just living on credit cards. But you know, that's what a lot of people have to do. If they're going to make that jump, you have to kind of jump in with both feet and be prepared to suffer for a while. But definitely worth it. But I had some terrible jobs, in my opinion, some really terrible jobs. Actually, one of the things I was doing for that company, when I first started out with that company, my boss had these 2 huge dogs, and they got skunked in his backyard. And I had this little truck. I had a little Toyota truck or something, and it had a carpet kit. And back then, I had a shag carpet in the back of this truck, and it came with it. I bought it used. It wasn't my choice. Anyway, shoved these 2 huge skunk dogs into the back of the truck, and I had to drive them 35 miles to the vet to get deskunked. And that smell lasted in my truck for about 6 months. I shampooed the carpet, I could not get it out of there. And I had to drive around delivering packages in that thing for 8 hours a day. It was, wow. Yeah, I paid some dues back then. Clear?
At what point in your life did you realize this is something that you wanted to do? Or, I should say, was it more of that you were discovered, or is it something that you wanted to pursue yourself?
The thing about the career for me, I went through it such a bass-backwards way. I never knew I could do voiceover. I had no idea, and it wasn't my plan. I'd been doing silly voices since I was a little kid. And back in my teens, I would say, when I first got my first answering machine, I would leave goofy messages, literally goofy as my message. that kind of thing. And I put them on there. And I put Goofy on there. I think Goofy was my first one that really started getting attention. I put this message on as Goofy. And somebody called with the wrong number. And they were just laughing on their message. That's all they did was laugh. And then I hear a click, and then it rings again. The guy calls back and goes, dude, I dialed you by mistake. He goes, that was the funniest message I ever heard. I'm telling all my friends. And so I started getting all these phone calls from people. And then I changed the message about a week later, and a couple people called back and they yelled at me. They left messages yelling at me for changing the message. And then I got more messages that said, well, actually it was kind of fun. Why don't you change it again? Let's see what else you can do. And so I started changing it every day. I literally put a different message on my answering machine every day. And that was the start of the sickness, I think. And then later on, when my kids were really little, I was doing some anime at that time, but I would go to their school and I would read stories, and I would take all my favorite Dr. Seuss stories and I would act out every part for the class. And I would go once a week and I would read all these characters. And the kids would give me their feedback on this. I'm talking about honest feedback. Oh, he left. He couldn't handle the honest feedback. Oh no, he didn't. He's right there. Sorry, old eyes. These little kids would listen to me doing these characters, and they'd say, "No, Mr. Blum, that wasn't right. I don't think that he would sound like that. He would sound like this," and they would give me their impression of what it was. But I learned so much from those little guys, because that's the voice they were hearing if it were animated. And so that was how I started that process in my head of what would my voice sound like if I were to voice that character being animated. And I started watching old cartoons, Bugs Bunny and that sort of thing, and I thought, you know, what would my interpretation of that sort of thing be if it were me? And so voices like Wolverine reading comic books would sort of lock themselves into my head, and I never thought that I'd get to actually do that character in an animated series. But Wolverine was in there, and you know, I'd be reading the comics, and he'd be saying, "Look out, Bob," you know, and that kind of thing. And that's the voice that would be going on in my head. So when I went into the studio, it was so easy for me to come up with a voice. They said, "All right, so what voice are we thinking of?" And I said, "Well, it's already there. Here it is." And I just gave them what had been in my head for 20 years. And they said, "We like it. That's it. That's what we've been hearing too." And so for me, it was a really organic kind of process. And like I said before, I started doing the anime stuff on the weekends just for fun. And I did that for 10 years before I started working on anything that really paid any money. And then I got into the union, and I got an agent, and I was still doing it on the side. And I was still doing it just for fun, and I never thought I could have a career out of it. And now, even 10 years after doing this full time, my dad still says, "So what are you going to do as a backup career?" Because entertainment isn't reliable. And part of that is true, because I'm always looking for the next job. But fortunately, I'm established enough now where I'm working most of the time, and so I don't have to worry about that anymore. But most people start out with stage and screen, and they go to acting classes, and they go to arts schools. And I think that's a great route too. And they're a lot more knowledgeable than I am, I can tell you that much. In the studio, I'm the dumb guy that doesn't know anything. They're shooting references back and forth about different actors' performances in films and different plays, and I'm the guy sitting there going, I don't know, I do stupid voices. So I wouldn't recommend my route because it took almost 30 years, but for me, that's what worked. And I think that's why I'm going to have longevity in the business, because it is an organic process and will always continue to be for me. I don't have to go by structure.
I wanted to ask about your Starscream performance, because there's been so many Starscreams throughout the year, and they all seem to be similar or striving for that similar sound, and yours is so very different. Was that kind of scary, or were you like, I'm just taking this in a totally different direction?
Starscream was another example of a character I had. Of course, I had Chris Lotta's voice in my head. I mean, there's nobody that really can do that voice exactly the way he did, except for maybe Charlie Adler. And Charlie does like this crazy deep version of Starscream in movies. But Charlie's very capable of doing that exactly like that, and which he did with Cobra Commander and some of the other things that he had done. So I have that reference in the back of my mind. But when I saw, sometimes what I do vocally is dictated by what I see visually. And I'm a very visual guy, and they actually gave me a picture of what Starscream was going to look like in this. And it's such a different interpretation of what he had ever been. In the movies, he's this big bulky thing, and he was sort of goofy looking in purple and some of the old G1 stuff. And then Tom Kenny's version was really kind of weird in the what was that, 90s, I guess. So I just kind of went with what came naturally. And I started dark. I started really dark and deep. And I didn't think they would let me do that for him because he was such a spindly character. I went actually opposite what I saw. And sometimes that just works in my warped brain. And so then they said, well, take that dark thing, and we want to know that you can go high and get to that Chris Lotta sort of place if you need to. And so Starscream sort of started out with a mid-Atlantic deep voice, and then all of a sudden, he would get into trouble, and it's like, come on now, Tony! He'd scream. And it's not Starscream! He'd go into that girly kind of screaming thing, and they wanted to be able to do the range, but they wanted to keep him dark and kind of scary, and definitely capable of inflicting damage. And then in the first episode, I'm taking out The Rock, his character, and it's like, oh man, I love that guy, and I love his character. I want to do that, and he's got this talent. He just rips through the guy's chest, and it's like, wow, this is a whole different take on Starscream, and this is going to be an interesting ride. So the great thing about this show also is that there are a lot of guys that worked on G1 involved in the show, including Peter Cullen and Frank Welker is there, and some of these guys that were involved in the original stuff of this. And the original designers for the show. I mean, some of them are involved in that, some of them are from the movie. The producers of the actual film series are involved in this, and executive producing, and they're actively involved, coming to sessions and giving their advice on what they'd like to see. And they are actually maintaining the continuity of Transformers from the 80s all the way up to today. And so it's going to be really faithful for the fans, and also an exciting ride for new people just getting in that have really never experienced the Transformers universe. So it's fun. It's so much fun. That's a show. I'm still pinching myself. I can't believe I'm part of it. It's really cool. How about another one? Right here, sir.
Can you do the voice of Zabuza?
Zabuza. Wow, that goes back a ways. Anybody remember Zabuza?
Who's he?
Who's he? He must be for pirates, not for ninjas, right? I hope I have something for Zabuza. I remember he yelled a lot. He had one of the best deaths, didn't he? Zabuza had one of the best deaths. He looked like a porcupine with all these things shoved into his back. It was pretty cool. Oh, here we go. Oh no, this is hard. Ushisaru ne itori ushi uma tori ne tore inumi ushi itsuji. Oh, I can't even do it anymore. These hand symbols. You remember that, right? Yeah, I'm going to do a loud line of his, so watch your ears. I was about to create a vortex, but he created one first! Okay. used to be able to do the hand signs chant, and we had to do it with 2 or 3 of us, I think, simultaneously. That was one of the hardest things I ever had to do, because it didn't make any sense in Japanese or English. So, it was interesting. Thank you for that. I'm gonna have to practice it again now. Who's next? Who's my next victim? I see a black hand right back there. My favorite cartoons growing up were, well, I loved a lot of the Hanna-Barbera stuff. I loved Warner Brothers, Bugs Bunny, Roadrunner, loved Roadrunner, loved the Flintstones, Jetsons. I'm old, so my cartoons were probably a generation before most of your cartoons. Wow, what else? Tom and Jerry, thank you. Yeah, Tom and Jerry is great. Yaki Doodle was one of my favorite characters back then, Yaki Doodle and Chopper, and I actually got to do Yaki for, do you know who Yaki Doodle is? He was this little character, he was a little duck, a little teeny tiny duck, and his best friend was this giant bulldog named Chopper. And Chopper was his protector against cats and everybody else. I'd like to swallow like this! And so they used him for Harvey Birdman, which you may be familiar with. Harvey Birdman has been around for a while. And so I got to come in, and they bring in a lot of the old Hanna-Barbera characters, and I got to do Yaki Doodle for that. So that was like a childhood dream come true. That was really fun. That's one of the very few things from my childhood that I actually did get to voice, and that I would have liked to voice from way back. And so, fun question. So, how about over here?
You were saying a lot when I was asking you about your career, how you got started. It's like you were saying you were reading, reading Dr. Seuss stories to the kids. What was your favorite one?
My favorite Dr. Seuss story?
Yeah.
Oh, green eggs and ham. One of these days I'll have to bring a copy to a con and do a live reading of that. That would be kind of fun. That would be fun. Yeah, we had a great time doing those. That was really fun. That was some of the best training I ever had. It was really great. I recommend that to everybody. Just read stuff out loud. It's really fun. Even if it isn't children's stuff, you read the news out loud in voices and it'll still work. Just the happy news. Right here. Starscream, Wolverine, Spike. I mean, most roles I never expect to get it. That's funny because there's, when I'm reading for a lot of these things, there's 200, 300, sometimes thousands of people reading for the role all across the country. And now with everybody having studios in their houses, the ability to do an audition, it has just opened up to anyone who's got a studio anywhere in the world. And so instead of, reading opposite, 12 or 15 people that are coming into a casting agency, I'm reading against everybody in the country. So I never expect to book stuff, and when I do book it, I do like the dance of joy. It's ridiculous. I'm like a little kid. I get so excited about it. And I wasn't worried about booking Spike. It's just that I wasn't sure if I was the right guy for it. I mean, I came in there and the director, Mary, she knew me from other stuff. We had worked together on other things. And she thought that I was a good match for that character. And I don't know if it was her decision to bring me in, but they brought me in based on something else I'd done. And so she had me do the voice, and I thought that Spike should have been, a little bit cooler or something. I didn't know. I didn't know the show. I had no idea what I was doing. She said, no, just speak in your natural speaking voice. He is really cool, and she told me a little bit about him. And she told me that he was kind of tortured inside and never really exactly happy. And so giving me that much information, she just sort of dialed me right in, and I felt pretty comfortable in it. But I didn't think that I was going to book something like that. I mean, it was such a big deal. They were making a big deal. I didn't know anything about the show at the time. But they were saying, this is going to be like one of the biggest shows of all time. You'll see once you start working on it, if you work on it, you'll see it's going to be one of the biggest shows of all time because it's so good. And so the build-up for me was a little scary. And I thought, well, I don't know if I'm ready for a big role like that. I don't know if just technically, I didn't know if I was ready. I didn't know if I was a good enough actor. And it took till all the way through to the end of the movie, working on the movie, where I said, God, this is really good. I really like this. And I said, I just was afraid that because I'm not an actor, that I wouldn't have been able to do a good enough job. And she said, what do you think you've been doing all this time? And it just didn't even occur to me, that question about, how I proceeded as as an actor in the industry. I didn't even know I was an actor until, a relatively short time ago. It was just fun for me. I was just having a good time. So, but yeah, that worked out okay. Spike worked out okay. It was good.